Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching. We've got information for today for the short term and, well, for the relative near term. Let's begin with the short term information. What's going on today? It's been reported that an unknown U.S. military aircraft has crashed inside of Imperial County in Southern California. And the preliminary reports are that 4 of the 5 crew have been reported as being killed on site, with 1 crew member missing. And there are also claims that the aircraft was carrying some form of nuclear material. So this is probably not something you're going to hear on your mainstream news. This comes through open source intelligence. And it's something we'll keep an eye on, but that's the biggest story of today that you're probably not going to hear. Yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security, speaking of in the short term, issued a National Terrorism Advisory System bulletin. Now, basically what they've done is they've said the same thing we've been saying on here for a while. We give our intel updates on Friday normally with what we've learned from the right-wing extreme groups. And basically, for those that doubt, here's the official report. It says, quote, as recent acts of violence in communities across the country have so tragically demonstrated, the nation remains in a heightened threat environment, and we expect that environment will become more dynamic in the coming months. This is according to the Secretary of the Department. The Department of Homeland Security remains steadfast in our commitment to provide timely information and resources to the American public and our partners across every level of government, in law enforcement, and in the private sector. This includes regular engagement with stakeholders to maintain awareness. Stakeholders sounds an awful lot like shareholders. This includes regular engagement with stakeholders to maintain awareness about the threat environment, trainings and online resources to help communities stay safe, increase sharing of information with law enforcement, and millions of dollars in grant funding opportunities for communities and organizations to enhance security and advancement. Prevention. In the coming months, DHS expects the threat environment to become more dynamic as several high-profile events could be exploited to justify acts of violence against a range of possible targets. These targets include public gatherings, faith-based institutions, schools, racial, ethnic, and religious minorities, government facilities and personnel, U.S. critical infrastructure, the media, and perceived ideological opponents. Threat actors have been recently mobilized to violence due to factors such as personal grievances, reactions to current events, adherence to violent extremist ideologies, including racially or ethnically motivated, or anti-government, anti-authoritarian, violent extremism, foreign adversaries, including terrorist organizations and nation-state adversaries, also remain intent on exploiting the threat environment to promote or inspire violence, sow discord, or undermine U.S. democratic institutions. DHS continues to assess that the primary threat, the primary threat of mass casualty violence in the United States stems from lone offenders and small groups motivated by a range of ideological beliefs, hate, or personal grievances. So you can go to dhs.gov/news 2022, and you will be able to find this briefing in its entirety. It's basically what I've been saying for the last 6 weeks. Keep your head on a swivel, no matter where you're at. especially in the on the weekends, especially if you're in public spaces, especially if you're in public spaces with a large amount of people, that becomes a soft target for mass casualties. And remember, I've said the guy, and I don't want to remember his name, Buffalo, New York, who was hunting black people. He killed 10, and I said, that's the bar now, okay? And they're going to want to, okay, well, 22, 19 kids and 2 teachers. That's adds up to 21 actually. And then some grievances in between. But anytime 4 or more people are killed, no matter what rankings, there are different rankings. We discussed that on a previous episode. You can go back and watch. Anytime 4 or more are killed, it's considered a mass shooting. And we've got too many of them. And we talked about it in the previous episode. The one thing that we can do is prepare. We can mentally prepare to react so that we aren't in shock, so that we aren't paralyzed, so that we aren't in panic. Just something to think about. All right. So we've talked about the big story of today that you're probably not going to hear about. We talked about the coming possibilities that the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has put out to the public, warning of terrorism. And the biggest threat's internal, despite Iran, despite Russia, despite China, despite Islamic extremism, despite anything else, the biggest threat's internal. So keep your head on a swivel. June is Pride Month. You know, be extra cautious if you're in the LGBTQ plus community going to events. Juneteenth's coming up, celebrated around the country. Be careful if you're going to those events. The people that are devoured by hate are looking for those kind of targets. So just to be aware. Now, we talked about today, we talked about the short term, and now the near term. This is something that governments aren't going to tell anybody about, because nothing can be done about it. And even if they did try to do something about it, chances are they'd make it worse. They're just, at the moment, the official response from most governments is nothing to see here, go about your daily business. What we're talking about is something that is coming. We have an idea when it is coming. It has happened in the past on Earth, just not when people were here. The Earth's magnetic poles are going to flip. Been doing a lot of research on this. As you can see, it's not a matter of will they, what happens when it is the Earth going to flip. These are 3 years ago, 7 years ago, 2 years ago. This has been in the scientific community for a long time. Old magma from ancient volcanoes has that magnetic current trapped within it. And you can tell the difference. The currents have flipped in the past. The magnetic poles have flipped in the past, if you will. I was going to do a whole lot on a long episode explaining all of this. And I will in the future if you want me to. I'm just going to keep it relatively short this time so that you get an idea what it is. I've shown June before. He runs the Mavstar Observatory in the United Kingdom. He is and has been tracking the magnetic pole movement and tracks it on a minute by minute basis. And this is the point where we're all watching. When the magnetic pole gets to this point, it's 40 degrees. Basically, it's the same latitude that Indianapolis, Indiana's on. Anybody across that latitude, that's the 40-degree mark. The North Pole magnetically is coming down to that mark. It's not going to be in Indiana. It's actually going to be in Siberia, in northern Russia, or pretty close to central Russia by the time it gets to its point. Now, it is, as it has come closer and closer, it's moving faster and faster. He has an experiment right here that shows that. And then he's also performed experiments on what happens when it gets to that 40-degree mark. And it, according to the experiments, it quickly, boom, goes down. Now we're talking about the magnetic poles, okay? We're not talking about the geographic North Pole and South Pole. Could those flip? Yes, they could. We don't have any real hard evidence that that is forthcoming. However, we have a lot of hard evidence that a polar flip is coming as far as magnetic poles. I'm going to play a couple of videos here, short videos. This one is 3 minutes and 2 seconds. And this basically gives you an elementary idea of what happens when Earth magnetic poles flip and the best outcome we can hope for.
Scientists claim that the Earth's magnetic poles will actually reverse within the next few thousand years. But why does that happen? And what exactly does it mean for us?
Now, this is an older video, and it wasn't all that long ago. We thought it might be thousands of years before it happened. The movement is much faster than anticipated. The Earth's magnetic field is decreasing much more rapidly than anticipated. And we've got new evidence, basically, is why it says it will happen in thousands of years. She also says in here that it takes 100 years for it to happen. And there's proof that that's not true either.
Hey guys, Tara here for D-News, and something that has always fascinated me is the Earth's magnetic field. Maybe it's because we can't see it with our own eyes, so it's this elusive thing that we pretty much assume to be constant. But believe it or not, the North and South poles as we know them today weren't always like that. 786,000 years ago, the Earth's magnetic field flipped, and it's remained constant ever since. But before that happened, South was actually North, and what we now know as North was actually South. According to scientists, every 500,000 years or so, the Earth's dipole magnetic field, which you can imagine like a bar magnet with a north end and a south end, starts to weaken before eventually reversing completely. No one is really sure why it happens, but it's thought to be caused by changes in the fluid portion of the Earth's iron core. Up until recently, scientists presumed this reversal process took a few thousand years to complete. But new evidence suggests that the most recent major reversal, 786,000 years ago, actually happened in less than 100 years, roughly the span of a single human lifetime. Obviously, flips like this have occurred several times throughout Earth's history, but the next one, scientists say, may happen within the next few thousand years. New evidence indicates that the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field is decreasing at a rate 10 times faster than normal, leading many geophysicists to believe that we're on the brink of another reversal. But what would happen if that did occur? Would there be any noticeable changes? Well, the good news is there are no documented catastrophes associated with past reversals. So
the past reversals have happened 12,000 years ago, possibly 6,000 years ago. Excursions, not total reversals. The last reversal, again, was 720,000 years ago. That's why there's no documented evidence of the damages.
So don't expect the human race to just immediately die out. But that doesn't mean nothing bad couldn't happen. Magnetic reversal would almost surely wreak havoc on our electrical grid, which could potentially bring it down. It would also make us vulnerable to energetic particles from the sun and cosmic rays, both of which can cause genetic mutations. And that could happen before the reversal even takes place. Like I described earlier, there's a period prior to reversals where the magnetic field gets progressively weaker, and the genetic mutations that arise from that could potentially increase cancer rates. So the longer it takes for that reversal process to complete, the more harmful it would be to us. Also worth mentioning is the fact that even though the last reversal only took 100 or so years, it was also preceded by a period of magnetic instability that spanned over 6,000 years. Meaning if the next reversal happens within a few thousand years from now, we could start seeing the effects of it very soon. Kind of scary to think about, but at the same time, it's not likely that any of this will affect us in our lifetime. So before you start packing up your family and moving off the grid doomsday prepper style, just remember that. Probably not worth it. What do you guys think, though? Are you
Okay. Again, I showed you this just to give you the best case scenario, if you will. Let's look at something a little more current and a little more realistic.
Be ahead of time. Once you get past that luck element that we mentioned in the last special episode, the second hurdle of survival is about your safe zone. Have you chosen well?
Many, many more are talking about safe zones and planning ahead with the months that we do have than the video I just shown you. That's going to be the government's stances. All the governments are going to say, nothing's going to happen. Okay. Yeah, it looks like the poles might flip. It's not really going to be a big deal. Might be a power outage for a while. Nothing to worry about. In the meantime, they've all prepared. Just something to think about. One more thing to think about before I get into this video. Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, and Elon Musk, the number 2, number 3, or number 1, depending on stocks at the time. Both of them were trying really, really hard to get into space and get off the planet. And both of them also have dug deep bunkers and deep tunnels. Something to think about.
Have you arrived at your destination and disposition? We can't do the entire planet, but you can apply key principles heard here to your location. And the location itself, apart from that luck element, is based mostly on 3 things: water, elevation to escape the great waves, and shelter, whether that's a forest or a cave. With the underlying notion that downtown anywhere is a wrong choice because being away from thousands of hungry people is always a good idea in a catastrophe, we will start with the water and jump back to episode 17 of the Catastrophe Cycle series. The recently famous Grasshopper geography site is not only splendor and science combined, but Robert delivers to us an excellent watershed colored map with many different regions, individual countries plotted in eye-popping color. But beyond the beauty, you can glean useful information about that situational awareness for you in those waterways, using the blue sector here in Central Africa. While lightning fingers outward, water drains to the broader lines and then into the sea. There will always be more water in the low-lying areas where it runs down and collects, but the water that falls at the top of the mountain is the cleanest there is, albeit much less of it. The site has tremendous state close-ups as well to help. It also has forest maps, which are places with potential animals, plant food, shelter materials, and more. And that is a nice little transition from a water lesson everyone should understand to the obvious question of elevation, and in the context of the Great Wave. While in theory, an earthquake could send a tsunami in any direction.
Great wave. How will there be a great wave? Well, we've got the Earth, we got the magnetic poles both shifting towards each other, by the way. And the magnetosphere, the magnetic protection we have on the outside of our Earth that protects us from radiation, from cosmic rays, etc., as well as our electromagnetic center, our molten core that rotates inside the Earth, that helps to generate the gravity that keeps us from floating away. When the reversal happens, we don't know. At one time, all of the Earth was in a state of what was called Pangea. It was one giant continent. And I'll do an episode on this coming up. And it broke up into the 7 continents we have now. Well, that probably happened during a magnetic pole flip because of various aspects, but that's probably what caused the initial breakup. And to understand all of this, you have to understand geography, the actual Earth itself, a little bit of magnetics, some basic thermodynamics because of plate tectonics, and the possibility of the continents moving is not out of the question. It's something that has to legitimately be considered. Any movement of the Earth, whether it is a jolt, whether it is a shift, the oceans are basically where the oceans are. And any kind of major shift is going to, imagine a bathtub or imagine a glass of water. And if you tilt the water, when you tilt it back, what happens? You get a wave. That's what he's talking about, escaping the great wave.
Or your crustal region could shift and turn. In general, the oceans are where they are, and they aren't tied to the surface. The evidence says they'll invade the land in the disaster, and in that case, they are most likely going to be moving in the direction of Earth's current rotation, from left to right, in all of these images we'll see here.
Now, just imagine, because it's true, what you're seeing here's the floor of the ocean. All right. At one time, this was dry and this was wet.
In a previous special video this month, we went over the new Valley of the Sun, which is centered in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, running north through Colorado Springs nearly to Denver and south past the Sierra Diablo Mountains, where Jeff Bezos is hollowing out one of them right next to a suborbital launch facility, and then down into Mexico. It is my #1 spot to live in the Americas. The Rockies provide the shield against the Pacific. I'm no fan of the West Coast for obvious reasons, or the middle of the Rockies.
You notice he said the Rockies provide the best shield from the Pacific. Well, you can't even see the Pacific except down here by Baja, Mexico, because the map, that's the amount of water that's expected to come over the western part of America as the water travels west to east first. Then once it completes that cycle of going all the way around west to east, it's going to shift back to where the water has always been. It's going to come back from east to west if the worst case scenario happens.
The weather will get brutal there, and there will be nowhere and no way to go. Towards the east, there's clearly evidence that not everything died in the last event, and the Ozarks and Appalachians do provide us our best chance there. By Alabama, Tennessee, Ohio, everything is trying to drain south towards the Gulf of Mexico, so that is an added bonus there if the great waves make it past the Rockies. And for the Atlantic Ocean sloshing back, which we must remember is definitively a thing too, the Appalachians should be able to withstand that second surge.
Okay, so how high do you have to be? You have to be on top of one of the mountains in Appalachia. I hope you're starting to get the picture. And again, I'm going to go into more detail on all of this coming up. I want to show you one more quick 5-minute video from our same source.
Good evening, folks. I often get similar questions about the tilt of Earth and the cyclical disaster, the ones I don't usually cover in detail. Or things like, why is the
cyclical disasters? There is a cycle that basically you can measure climate disasters. Okay, global warming. You can go back and check all my politics. You can go back and global warming, I never thought was a thing. Climate change has been a thing. We're actually getting colder. The Earth isn't getting warmer, despite the 1 degree temperature rise, blah, 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 that everything's going to melt if we have any more carbon. I personally don't buy that and never have, but it was a good scam to try to create a carbon neutral footprint. Now, do I think it's a good idea to have less pollution in the atmosphere? Absolutely, of course. I'd like for it to be zero, but to blame that on what's coming it's not scientific and it's not factual. It's just a continued thing, to try to get you to buy electric cars. When the big question ought to be, where's that electricity going to come from if it's not going to come from a coal-fired electrical generating plant or a water generating electrical plant? Okay, electricity doesn't just appear. Well, it does through lightning bolts, but we don't harness that. The electricity we create it still has a carbon footprint. Just something to think about.
There's evidence of the magnetic poles in their positions for millions of years if the Earth tilts? Why do ancient star charts show the stars as they are now, or the monoliths still line up perfectly with the stars if the Earth tilts? Why is some Antarctic ice over 1 million years old if it goes to the equator every other cycle? Well, the first two are easy, as we have gone over some of them. The Pentagon papers taken by Major White support the story of numerous others and the modern observations, and they suggest the poles go back and forth, putting them in the same places repeatedly. This is why there is indeed expected to be that evidence over long periods. As for the star charts and monoliths with astronomical significance, I'm pretty sure most of those are less than 6,000 years old. All are less than 12,000 years old. They are all from after the last catastrophe and tilt, so yeah.
By the way, many scientists are now referencing an event 6,000 years ago, a great flood that impacted the entire Earth. They call it the Noah event. There is a lot of interweaving going on between science and faith. Numerically, actually, I'll do an episode on that. But there are numbers. I believe God used mathematics to create the universe. It wasn't just some big random bang. All right, that's just me.
They better be the same. But the one about the 1 million-year-old Antarctic ice, that one is a bit harder. And I bet some of you were wondering about the ice that goes to the equator from the poles and what happens to it. For this question about a 1 million-year-old Antarctic ice, we need to address 3 things: the dating, the equatorial glaciers that exist today, and the uniqueness of the Holocene, the period we're in now. So first, if you recall, they once thought Greenland ice was over 1 million years old as well. And then they found evidence that the entire thing was ice-free in the last 100,000 years. They make a lot of assumptions about Antarctica, and on top of those, there is a problem with the isotopes they use to date ice as well. We've spent a great deal of time going over the dozens of studies like this one, which does happen to be my favorite, where they thought the ice in Tibet was over 500,000 years old, but now say the upper limit may be less than 20,000 years old. Million-year-old ice in Antarctica? I wouldn't be so sure about that. But hey, let's forget what we just said and play devil's advocate. Let's presume they are correct. Yes, you can still move the current polar positions to the equator every other cycle, and no, there is virtually no chance that they're going to melt away. Here is where today's low latitude, the current tropical glaciers reveal, and the heat of the last 12,000 years tends to trick our imagination. When we see the equatorial glaciers that exist today, we must realize that those are still there after 12,000 years in the tropics, and that is with the Holocene, the name for our current hot interglacial, being way, way hotter than previous 12,000 year cycles, with the last 10 of them being within the glacial period of the approximately 100,000 year cycle. The previous interglacial was over 120,000 years ago. Well, what if this wasn't a hot interglacial that we were in right now? What if this was a cycle 50,000 years ago? How much ice would be left at the equator after 12,000 years at that point if the world was in a glacial period? I'd wager there'd be much more than just a few remaining tropical glaciers. There would still be enough left to make you look at Antarctica and Greenland and say, yeah, 12,000 years is nowhere near enough to melt all of that, especially if you take 3 to 6 degrees off the planet. By the way, the areas with tropical glaciers will be heading to the poles once again, just like last cycle when they accumulated the ice that is still there today. And so yes, there may indeed be ancient ice at Antarctica, and it doesn't change the story one bit. The heat of the interglacial is tricking us into thinking that all of Antarctica would melt if you put it at the poles. The world today says it isn't so. And when you go back to the other cycles, there wasn't the heat to melt it either. When we remember that this is all probably moot because it's probably not 1,000,000 years old in all likelihood, and that data will change just as it did in Tibet and Greenland. Yes, this means I expect Antarctica and Greenland to remain ice worlds at the tropics for the entire next cycle, when they will go back to the poles and accumulate once again.
Okay, so basically, his theory is that the glaciers in Peru, which is equatorial, and that they have been there. Obviously, they're not going to create in a tropical environment. They've been there for thousands and thousands of years, and at one time, Peru and the area directly across from Peru on the globe were at the poles, and they will shift back to those poles again. That doesn't mean that is going to happen anytime soon, okay? It doesn't mean it's not either, because the magnetic poles are indeed flipping. So, two final things here. When's it going to happen? When are the magnetic poles going to flip? This was, we only have 10 months left. Without getting into the entire video, March of 2023, the poles will shift to a point where, if everything goes as the experiments are showing, we're going to have a shift, a major shift. March 2023. Nine months and a few days away from right now. Again, I'm going to do a really in-depth, long episode on all of this. And I hope you'll watch it. Show the science, show the proof, show everything. It is happening. I've got another video that shows the South Pole is already well outside of Antarctica and heading towards where the North Pole is currently heading. They'll meet somewhere probably in the Indian Ocean, and when they meet, Will they repel and flip back to where they were? Or will they shift and south becomes north and north becomes south? We'll look at that. One final thing here real quick before I close. I've had people ask me, do you have black blood in you? Because the channel been pretty sciencey today, but normally the channel's about equality and freedom and justice. And my latest, and I had said no, I don't, as far as my DNA. Well, I got an update from ancestry.com. Your DNA looks most like DNA from these 6 world regions. 51% from England and Northwestern Europe. Finland, Sweden and Denmark also included. Scotland and Wales included. Ireland, which I had always been told we were basically Irish, and come to find out only 8% Irish and 1% Indigenous America, somewhere from in this purple zone. So red, brown, black, 1%. That's what I know at the moment. And I imagine a lot of white people that are full of hate because they think they're superior to anybody that's not white. Maybe they should take a test. Just something to think about. Thank you all for watching, as always. I love you all, sincerely do. And this will be out. This is coming Wednesday night. Let's see, it's the 8th. Wednesday the 8th at 10 p.m. This is when this is going to be broadcast. Tomorrow, the 9th. I don't know why I said the 11th. I do know why I said the 11th. Anyway, the 9th, Thursday the 9th, there is the first hearing, public hearing on what happened January 6th, the insurrection, the overthrow of the government, Trump's attempt to commit treason, sedition charges leveled against several for attempting to overthrow the government. We'll learn more about that tomorrow night. That starts at 8 o'clock, and that's going to be on all television networks. I was going to do a broadcast and watch it and have you watch along with me if you so desire. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to watch. I'm going to come on live after the hearings are over, and we'll talk about the hearings. We'll talk about your questions on this episode. The polls are going to flip. They're going to flip in March, if not sooner, because the closer it gets, the faster it's moving. And we'll show you the science that backs all this up. Not tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, you can come on and talk. I've been telling people I'm going to be doing this, and I haven't done it yet. Tomorrow night's the night we do it. You can talk about what happened at the hearings. You can talk about this episode. You can talk about equality, inequality, justice, injustice. We'll just talk tomorrow night. That'll be after the hearings. I'm guessing around 11. It may be 11:30. It may be midnight. It'll be dependent upon when they end those. And again, thank you for watching this. It's, it's something that we all need to be aware of, and it's something that this isn't just discovered. All right, this is something that we've known about for a long time. And the first studies were in 1830. Okay, so we've known about it for a long time. It's just the information we now have shows that everything's deteriorating much rapidly and moving much faster. We thought we might have to 2030, originally 2050. We thought maybe 2030, then like 2025, and now we're down to March 2023. Talk about all that and more tomorrow night live. I hope you'll join me, and I thank you for watching this. I love you all. Blessings and peace.